Linux is no longer just an alternative operating system. It has become a movement, a philosophy, and for many of us, a daily driver that represents freedom, control, and transparency. But before anything else, let me say this clearly, so nobody jumps to conclusions in the comments. Don't call me AI. I am a real-time human sharing real opinions and real frustrations. And today I want to talk about something that a lot of Linux users feel, but don't always openly admit. The things we hate about Linux, not because we want it to fail, but because we actually want it to become better than anything else out there. Because if we ignore the problems, Linux will never reach its true potential. So this is not a hate video. This is a brutally honest breakdown of what's holding Linux back and how we can fix it.
The first thing that really frustrates me about Linux is fragmentation. Now on paper, fragmentation sounds like freedom. You get hundreds of distributions, different desktop environments, package managers, system architectures, and customization options. And yes, that sounds amazing at first, but when you actually live inside this ecosystem for a long time, you start realizing that this freedom comes with a cost, especially for new users. Imagine someone coming from Windows or Mac, they search for Linux and suddenly they are hit with Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch, Debian, Manjaro, Popos, Linux Mint, and the list just keeps going. And that's just the beginning. Then they have to choose between GNOME, KDE, XFCE, Cinnamon, and more. And every tutorial they find online might apply to one distro but completely break another, and this creates confusion, inconsistency, and sometimes frustration that pushes people away before they even get comfortable. And even for experienced users, fragmentation can slow things down. Developers have to package software for multiple formats like Deb, RPM, Flatpak, Snap, Appimage, and each one behaves slightly differently. So instead of focusing on innovation, energy gets wasted on compatibility layers. Now, how do we fix this? The answer is not to remove choice, because choice is the core of Linux. But we need better standardization across distributions. Things like universal packaging should be simplified and unified, not competing with each other. Documentation should be clearer and more centralized. And maybe most importantly, the Linux community needs to guide new users better instead of overwhelming them with options on day one. The second thing I hate about Linux is inconsistent hardware support. And this is a big one, because no matter how powerful or stable your system is, if your hardware doesn't work properly, the experience breaks instantly. There are still situations where Wi-Fi adapters don't work out of the box. Printers become a nightmare. Graphics drivers require manual tweaking, and things like Bluetooth or touchpads behave unpredictably depending on the distro and kernel version. Now yes, Linux has improved massively over the years, and for many devices it works perfectly. But the inconsistency is the real issue. One laptop might run flawlessly, while another with slightly different hardware struggles with basic functionality. And for a new user, this feels like the system is broken, even when it's just a driver issue. Now, why does this happen? Mostly because hardware manufacturers don't always prioritize Linux support. They focus on Windows because that's where the market is. And Linux developers have to reverse engineer drivers or rely on limited documentation. So how do we fix this? We need stronger collaboration between hardware companies and the Linux community, more open drivers, better kernel integration, and ideally, more companies shipping devices with Linux pre-installed. Because when hardware is designed with Linux in mind, everything just works, and that's the experience we need to aim for. The third thing that really annoys me is software availability and compatibility. And before someone says Linux has everything, let's be honest, it doesn't. Especially when it comes to professional or industry standard software, many popular applications are either missing, poorly supported, or require workarounds like Wine, Proton, or virtual machines. And while these solutions are impressive, they are not perfect. Sometimes they break, sometimes performance drops, and sometimes things just don't work at all. And this becomes a major barrier for people who rely on specific tools for work, whether it's video editing, graphic design, music production, or certain business applications. And even when alternatives exist, they don't always match the features or workflow that users are used to. Now again, this is not entirely Linux's fault because companies choose where to invest their resources, but it still affects the user experience. So what's the solution? We need to make Linux a more attractive platform for developers. Better APIs, stable environments, and a larger user base can encourage companies to build native applications. At the same time, the community should continue improving compatibility layers like Proton because they are already changing the game, especially in gaming. And if this continues, software limitations could become less of a problem over time. The fourth thing I hate about Linux is the learning curve. Now, some people will say that learning is a good thing, and I agree. But there's a difference between learning and struggling. Linux often expects users to understand concepts that are completely unfamiliar to them. Things like the terminal, file permissions, package managers, repositories, and system configurations. And while experienced users love this level of control, beginners can feel lost and intimidated. Even simple tasks sometimes require searching forums, copying commands, and hoping nothing breaks. And when something does break, troubleshooting can feel like solving a puzzle without instructions. And this creates a perception that Linux is only for tech-savvy people, which is not true, but the experience can make it feel that way. So how do we fix this? We need better onboarding, more intuitive interfaces, clearer error messages, and tools that guide users instead of expecting them to already know everything. The terminal should be a powerful option, not a requirement for basic tasks. And if Linux can become more beginner-friendly without losing its power, it can reach a much wider audience. The fifth and final thing I hate about Linux is the community toxicity that sometimes appears, and I know this might be controversial, because the Linux community is also one of the most passionate and helpful communities out there, but there is a side of it that can be unwelcoming, especially to new users. People asking simple questions sometimes get responses like, just read the manual, or you're using the wrong distro, and this creates a barrier that pushes people away instead of helping them grow. And the irony is that Linux is all about freedom and inclusivity, but the attitude of some users contradicts that philosophy. Now again, this is not everyone. There are many amazing people who genuinely help others, but the negative experiences stand out and can damage the reputation of the entire ecosystem. So how do we fix this? It starts with mindset. Experienced users need to remember what it felt like to be a beginner. Patience and guidance can make a huge difference, and creating a welcoming environment is just as important as writing good code, because at the end of the day, technology is built for people. Now, after talking about all these problems, you might think Linux is in a bad place, but that's not true at all. In fact, the reason we can even have this conversation is because Linux has grown so much. It's powering servers, cloud infrastructure, supercomputers, smartphones through Android, and even gaming is becoming a strong area, thanks to projects like Proton and the rise of handheld devices. And the truth is, every system has flaws. Windows has its own issues. Mac has its own limitations. But what makes Linux special is that it has the ability to evolve faster because it's open, collaborative, and driven by a community that actually cares. So when we talk about fixing Linux, we're not starting from zero. We're building on something incredibly strong, and the path forward is clear. Better standardization without sacrificing freedom, stronger hardware support through collaboration, improved software availability by attracting developers, a smoother learning experience for new users, and a more welcoming community that encourages growth instead of gatekeeping. And if these things improve, Linux won't just be an alternative, it could become the default choice for millions of people around the world. And maybe the most important thing to understand is that criticism is not hate, it's investment. When people point out problems, it means they care enough to want improvement, and that's exactly what Linux needs. Not blind praise, but honest feedback and continuous effort. Because perfection is not a destination, it's a process. And Linux is still evolving every single day. So if you're watching this and you're a Linux user, think about your own experience. What frustrates you? What would you change? And more importantly, what can you contribute? Because one of the most powerful things about Linux is that anyone can be part of its future, whether it's writing code, reporting bugs, creating tutorials, or simply helping someone in a forum. Every small action matters, and that's how real change happens. And if you're not a Linux user yet, don't let these problems scare you away. Instead, see them as areas that are actively being improved, because the direction Linux is heading in is incredibly exciting, and the more people join, the faster it gets better. At the end of the day, Linux is not perfect, but it's real, it's evolving, and it's one of the few systems where users actually have a voice, And that's something worth fighting for, improving, and building on, because the future of computing should not be controlled by a few companies. It should be shaped by everyone, and Linux is one of the strongest steps in that direction.